Today on the show, psychologist and best-selling author Daniel Goleman on how to use emotional intelligence to achieve an optimal state every day. Welcome to The Art of Excellence. In the words of Aristotle, excellence is never an accident. It is always the result of high intention, sincere effort, and intelligent execution. I am your host, Glenn Zweig. Join me now as I dive into the lives and careers of world-class entrepreneurs, athletes, entertainers, scientists, thought leaders, and explorers to uncover the ingredients to their extraordinary accomplishments. My guest today is Daniel Goleman. Dan is a psychologist, former science journalist for the New York Times, and the author of 13 books, including the #1 bestseller, Emotional Intelligence. He has worked with organizations around the globe, examining the way social and emotional competencies impact the bottom line. Ranked one of the 10 most influential business thinkers by the Wall Street Journal, Daniel has won several awards, including the HBR McKinsey Award for the Best Article of the Year, and the Centennial Medallion awarded to him by Harvard's Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. His latest book, which is titled Optimal: How to Sustain Personal and Organizational Excellence Every Day, shows how emotional intelligence can help us have rewarding and productive days every day. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Glenn.
So I've got to start here because it's been on my mind. You wrote this book, Emotional Intelligence, back in 1995.
Yes.
I graduated from business school that year. It feels like about a lifetime and a half ago. I remember when the book came out. I'm going to feed you a compliment here, and it's coming from the bottom of my heart, which is I think you, sir, have done more to popularize that concept of emotional intelligence more than any other book, more than any other individual. I would put it up there as one of the 10 most influential books ever in neuropsychology for starters, if not leadership, more broadly speaking. So the question here, when you wrote the book, did you have any sense that it would have that kind of global impact that it had?
Of course not. You never know when you write a book what kind of impact it'll have or how well it will do. I was a little shocked by the worldwide popularity of emotional intelligence. I was particularly shocked that there was huge pickup in the business sector on what was a very slim chapter on leading with heart. But it really seems to have struck a chord, and as you probably well aware, there was about a 10-year time when the Harvard Business Review and its press was featuring emotional intelligence as a key ingredient in leadership and in teams and so on, which I think that added a boost to emotional intelligence its traction for sure.
And even though it was written in 1995,
Yes.
it feels like something has happened over the last, 5 to 10 years, where somehow it feels like it's accelerated. Just the whole understanding of this concept and why it's so important and why EQ will eat IQ's lunch every day. But you get that sense too, that somehow it's become much more in our broad consciousness?
Well, the concept of emotional intelligence, not mine. It's Peter Salovey, who's now the president of Yale. When he was junior professor there, wrote a paper about emotional intelligence in a rather obscure journal with his then graduate student, John Mayer. And I was then a science journalist at the New York Times. And I picked it up and I thought, wow, that is such a great oxymoron. Emotional intelligence. Those two things don't go together. But when you think they're talking about being intelligent about emotion, It's a whole other thing. So when I wrote the 95 book, I hadn't intended to make it about emotional intelligence. I was then covering a decade of findings about emotions in the brain. It was what's called the decade of the brain. I thought I'd write a book about that. But then the emotional intelligence framework seemed so appealing. And I added my thoughts on that. But I didn't have any direct data back in 95 because it was a brand new concept. There wasn't much research bearing directly on emotional intelligence. That's why I've come back around with this new book, Optimal, to emotional intelligence, because in the last 25 years, there's been an explosion of research in the area. And now there's lots and lots of data really confirming basically hunches I had early on. So the new book, Optimal, brings that all together and talks about how to have an emotionally intelligent, not just leader, but team, division, organization. That's a kind of an extension of the original concept.
Yeah, so before we jump into Optimal, which by the way, I love the book, I want to start, if we could, not everyone listening maybe understands the definition of emotional intelligence. So I thought we could just have like a foundational tutorial here. Can you just explain the essence? There's sort of four parts to it as you explain it, just so we all can be on the same level here.
What I mean by emotional intelligence is crucial for leadership, for example, because it's about leading yourself and then leading other people. The first part is self-awareness. Know thyself, as they've said, and that means knowing what you're feeling, why you're feeling it, how it is shaping your perception, your thinking, and your impulse to act. We don't often enough stop or pause or look within to consider those elements, but that's what's driving what we do, particularly when we're in the grip of emotion. And it's important that we realize that. And if you do realize it, then you can take the next step, which is self-management, which is the second part of emotional intelligence, which means being resilient, keeping your emotions from disrupting what you have to attend to right now, focusing, recovering. You can't decide what I'm going to feel, how strongly I'll feel it, or when. But once you do feel it, you have a choice point. And that's when you can start managing emotions. And resilience is really the time it takes you to recover from the peak of an emotion to calm, to clear. And there's an inverse correlation between clarity, which you need for good decision making, for example, and emotional upset. The more upset you are, the less clear. It's very clear. And also, self-management isn't just about handling negative emotions, disruptive emotions. It's also about keeping your eye on the goal, whatever it may be, despite what you're feeling. It means staying optimistic no matter what happens, bouncing back. It means being agile, being able to roll with the punches and, think of and come up with a good way of responding. So that's the second part, self-management. The third part is empathy, knowing what other people are feeling. And here it's important to realize that there are three kinds of empathy, each of which is instantiated in a different part of the brain. One is cognitive empathy. I know how you think. I know how you see things. I know the language you use to yourself to explain the world. This helps me be a good communicator with you because I can message to you in terms you understand. The second kind of empathy is very different, and it involves a different part of the brain. It's emotional empathy. I know what you feel because I feel it too. And this has to do with the social brain and circuits that form an automatic bridge, brain to brain, which is not just automatic, it's unconscious and instantaneous. So it means emotions are contagious. If you're open to this kind of feedback, or feeling sense, I should say, then you have the ability to have emotional empathy. This means that you can sense not only how the person is feeling, but how they're responding to what you're saying or doing, and if you need to change accordingly. The third kind, which I think is essential for leadership, is little known. Technically, it's called empathic concern. It's not just that I know how you think, I know how you feel. I actually care about you. This is the kind of empathy that a parent has for a child, and I think that a good leader has for a direct report. This is the kind of empathy that builds trust, that strengthens the bond between a leader and those that are being led. If they feel that the leader cares about them, then they can relax, then they can be themselves, then they are loyal, actually. We have data now that shows that this kind of leadership lowers turnover. This also relates to bosses people hate and bosses people love. And one of the things that people dislike about boss is a feeling of they just don't care about me. And this is why coaching, for example, or being a mentor is a very important part of leadership, because you're seeing that you can help develop other people. And that makes them feel that you do care about them. The fourth part is really social skill. It's being able to influence people, to persuade, to direct, to guide, being able to inspire, speaking from the heart to the heart in a way that really moves people. It's been shown that this has the most positive impact on the climate of those being led. People feel more engaged. If there's a kind of greater purpose than just, the specs of my job, that I'm part of a bigger mission, that really matters. And it also means you can surface simmering disagreements, help resolve conflicts. You're a good team player. You can be a team member or you can lead a team. And by the way, very important fact, there's lots of data now from Yale that shows that the leader's mood, if it's very positive, people on a team catch that mood and their performance tends to go up if it's positive. If it's negative, if the leader is anxious or angry, whatever, people catch that mood and performance goes down. That's why managing yourself is the first part of leadership. So anyway, just to round it out, the social skill part of leadership, which is the most obvious, builds on all the other three parts.
Perfect. Super helpful. One other definition. I think most people, or I'll speak for myself, I was always thinking when I see the abbreviation EQ, I use that synonymously with emotional intelligence. But a few Google searches tells me, no, that's actually emotional quotient, which is not exactly one and the same with emotional intelligence, I think. So could you just, for the sake of clarity, make sure that I understand the distinction?
Well, I use the term EI for emotional intelligence, which is to contrast it with IQ. EQ was invented as a term by some editor somewhere or picked up by marketers, and it's been used in a kind of sloppy way as a synonym for emotional intelligence. I don't differentiate. I think they're aiming at the same skill set. I prefer EI because, in a sense, it's technically more correct. Cognitive abilities, technical skill reside in the same part of the brain that IQ does. Mm-hmm. And emotional intelligence involves that part of the brain, but also the emotional centers and a smooth interaction of the two.
Okay. Appreciate that. All right, let's get into this optimal state.
Okay.
So to start, Dan, you distinguish the optimal state from a flow state. A flow state being a somewhat rare occurrence, and an optimal state being a more attainable goal that we can achieve on a regular basis. Do you mind, once again, just for the sake of everyone aligning here, define flow state for those that don't know it? I think a lot of people do, but not everyone. And then how is that distinguished from optimal state?
Let me start with the optimal state. And this is based on, 1,200 journals, daily journals people kept for a study being done at Harvard Business School. End of the day, they'd say what they felt, what happened, and so on, and whether they had a good day or a bad day. And what it showed was that on people's good days, best days, they were highly productive, they were highly engaged, they cared about what they were doing, they felt very connected to their work, connected to other people, and things went well. That's happily a very large chunk of people's days. Flow, on the other hand, refers to that one time you outdid yourself. You were fantastic. I think flow is on the spectrum with optimal, but it's a very rare event. It's very idiosyncratic. You can't make it happen. And you're lucky when it does. But if you are a perfectionist, you're beating yourself up when you don't do it. And I think that's unnecessary. I think it gets in the way of your having a good day. So in optimal, we say, flow is nice, but let's look at the spectrum that flow is the peak of and look what's beneath that, because you'll find that it's a kind of a pyramid where many, many more days fall into that optimal zone, which you'd say is sub-flow. And people, I think, will do better to aim for optimal and be pleased and satisfied with optimal and not berate themselves because they didn't get into flow that day.
And so just to extend that a little bit, whereby the complete absorption in an activity is the outcome of flow, you suggest that the ability to tune in fully as a doorway into this optimal state. So in other words, focus. Focus is one of the keys to entering this optimal state.
Yeah, and in the original research was done at the University of Chicago, led by a guy named Csikszentmihalyi. Anyway, they asked people, tell us about a time you outdid yourself, one time. And they found that it didn't matter if it was a basketball player or a neurosurgeon or a ballerina. Phenomenologically, they're all describing the same state inside. And it was one where they were at their best, no matter what the criterion for performance was. They were fully focused. They lost all self-consciousness. Time seemed to collapse, and it felt great. And what we say is that, focus is not just some epiphenomena. Focus itself is a pathway. The more you can focus and put aside disruptive thoughts, the distractions, all of the things that come to us in our off times, the thoughts that flood in and they become our stream of thought can be distractions when we're trying to attend to something important, a task at hand. And what we say is being able to let go of those other thoughts and fully focus on what you're doing is going to not only help you be in the optimal state, it's going to help you be at your most productive.
Okay, and so then just to tie focus into EI, self-awareness, which back to your definition is that first quadrant, that's the foundation of our ability to concentrate. So the higher our self-awareness, the better we can focus. The better we can focus, the better able we are to get in this optimal state. Can you help me understand the linkage between self-awareness and focus?
Yeah, you said it very well. If you're aware of your thoughts and your feelings, which is what self-awareness allows, then you know what's relevant and what's irrelevant. And you can put aside what's irrelevant and pay full attention to what matters now. That's focus. Paying full attention to what matters to you right now, whatever that may be.
You've been in this for decades. Have you noticed with social media and everything else that our collective ability, an average person's ability to focus, has waned over time? I sort of felt for myself. I'm just wondering if that's a broad trend that you've observed.
I would put it differently.
Okay.
I would say the distractions have become more and more seductive. You don't see people going anywhere without an iPhone in their or phone in their hand or nearby. And the phone is, can be a great ally or a great enemy. particularly an enemy of focus. So whatever is distracting to you is always at hand. And the more we fall prey to those distractions, the less focused we are. And the distractions that matter the most, this is interesting, are not, the chatter of someone at the next table in a coffee shop. It's what's emotionally important to you. That's what grabs your mind. That's what pulls your attention away from what it is you have to do. And the way the reward structure of the phone or online life is what gets the most eyeballs, what is the most attractive to people. And it turns out it's emotional. It's what makes people angry. It's what makes people turned on. It's what makes people anxious. Those are the kinds of things that pull us away. And it's amped up, I think, the normal range of distractions that are just inside our head, and added to that a whole lovely range of other distractions that pull us away. So I would say, yes, to the extent that people these days are more vulnerable to those outer distractions, in addition to the usual set of inner distractions, we're more distracted, which puts a premium on the ability to be focused. I think that's one reason we've seen the rise in popularity of mindfulness in school and the workplace, because mindfulness is a direct rehearsal of paying attention, and we need it more than ever.
So you also mentioned how self-awareness helps us find our sense of purpose, which is really critical to self-motivation. And even if we're not aligned with the purpose of an organization, and this I thought was really interesting, we can still find an inner sense of purpose that fuels us. And you gave this really interesting story I was hoping you could retell here about this New York City bus driver. I think Govan Brown was the name.
So this is a guy, I was on his bus. I didn't know his name the first time I was on the bus. Mm-hmm. He had a bus that went up Madison Avenue. And people would wait for his bus because he was fantastic. He would engage everyone on the bus. He'd say, you come on the bus, he'd say, hi, welcome, how's your day going? Like he meant it. And, this is in a city where people don't expect that at all. And then he'd carry on a dialogue with everyone on the bus. You're looking for suits, there's a great sale at this department store here. And did you see the exhibit in this museum over here? And on and on and on like that. Then people would get off the bus and he'd say, like he meant it, I hope you have a wonderful day. It turned out, and I only learned this from his obituary in the Times, that he had gotten about 3,000 plus letters of commendation, not one complaint over his career as a bus driver. He was the only bus driver that they held a retirement party for because he had fans. People loved Govan Brown. Turned out he was the pastor of a black church on Long Island, and he saw his passengers on the bus as part of his flock. And he treated them like he would treat anyone who he was the minister for. And it was quite lovely as an experience. So there's someone who had a very mundane job, driving a bus. If you look at the mission statement of the New York Transit Authority, it is not very inspiring. It's like getting a lot of people where they want to go on time, something like that. He transformed what he did because he brought a better, bigger, higher purpose to being a bus driver. And it mattered enormously. And what we found in our research is that people who have a sense of purpose, even if it doesn't necessarily match their organization, but who feel inspired in what they do it better, whatever it might be.
Well, they do it better, and they're just more engaged. Like they're probably actually happy to get up and go to work in the morning.
Exactly. They're engaged. They feel a sense of purpose in what they're doing. Their work is meaningful, even though on the face of it, it may not be. There's another story. Back in the day, when NASA was trying to put someone on the moon, somebody went to NASA headquarters and interviewed people that worked there. They interviewed a janitor. He was asked, "What's your job?" He said, "I'm putting a man on the moon." He was inspired by the organizational purpose. And so even though what he was doing day in, day out was very mundane, he felt a higher purpose too. So I think that's one of the elements of being a great leader, and we've seen this in research on leadership styles, is being able to articulate a shared mission in a way that inspires people. It gets the best out of people. You know, this also speaks to how to look for someone who really would be the best person for a job. And I'm not sure that you can identify emotional intelligence when someone is applying for a job because they're trying to look their best. If you can interview people that have worked with them who will tell you honestly what they find about the person, that's great. That's a big advantage.
So once we're aware of our own feelings or thoughts and feelings, we have to be able to manage them, of course, which is where that second quadrant, self-management, comes into play. And self-management, you put it, is dependent upon cognitive control, which enables us to stay focused, back to the point about focus. And without it, we'd be very impulsive. We'd react in ways that are counterproductive.
Sure.
And it's what's encouraging about all of this, including this one, is these are all tools that we may not be good at innately, but we can learn and we can improve. So this being one, how does one improve cognitive control? What can you do?
First of all, everybody knows about cognitive control because we've all been 3 and 4, and then we've been 7 and 8. Or you've had children and you've seen them change from the time they're toddlers to the time they're like 3rd graders in terms of impulse control. Cognitive control is the element or the circuitry in the brain that manages impulse. And young toddlers and preschoolers don't have good cognitive control. They haven't developed that part of the brain. There's something called the 5 to 7 spurt where this part of the brain comes online. It tends to come online a bit earlier in girls than boys, but everybody gets it eventually. And it means you don't do everything, every whim doesn't get acted out, unlike a 2-year-old or 3-year-old. And cognitive control, because of what's called neuroplasticity, which is just a simple maxim now that the brain reacts to repeated practice. Cognitive control can be enhanced. Focus can be enhanced, by the way, too. And cognitive control can be enhanced by delaying gratification with kids. And with any adult, you can enhance cognitive control by, for example, mindfulness enhances cognitive control. The reason it does is that you decide, let's say focus. I'm going to focus on my breath. That's commonly used, is very neutral. That means when your mind wanders off, and it will, and you notice it wandered, you bring it back. And every time you bring it back, you're strengthening the muscle for cognitive control. And we know that cognitive control can be strengthened, can be enhanced. Many people who are in prison need to have better cognitive control, for example. I think we're missing an opportunity if we don't help people with that. But people in the workplace or executives, I think the cognitive control, by the way, is a corollary of focus. The better you can focus, the better your cognitive control.
Okay, and then you also bring up something called emotional balance, which is our ability to manage our emotions. You sort of need that to manage stress and other things, curveballs that are thrown your way. Curious how emotional balance is linked with cognitive control. Do you need one to have the other?
Yes, I think they go together. Emotional balance refers to the capacity to be resilient, to recover from what we technically call stress arousal, which means I'm uptight, I'm anxious, I'm angry, I'm frustrated. Strong negative emotions that disrupt our focus. They're distractions, they're inner distractions. So the more we can focus, which entails cognitive control, the more balanced we are or can be. And as I said before, we don't know what we're going to feel or when we're going to feel it or how strong it will be. Once we feel something, that's when cognitive control is so crucial, because it helps us manage the feeling and return to calm and clear.
So let me ask you this, because I'm guessing I probably struggle with this one. I think in the sense of, if I'm in social contexts, such as a work environment, I can keep it together. Even if my blood is boiling on the inside, I can stay calm and collected on the outside.
Right.
If I am alone and there is bumper to bumper traffic, I lose it. I can just be the one. I'm that guy yelling, in the car out of frustration. Or if I'm on the phone with customer service and it's taken an hour and a half for someone who doesn't seem to have a clue, I just lose it. So I'm trying to understand: is this more about I should be able to do a better job of controlling how I'm feeling on the inside, or is it more about it's hard to control how you feel? It's more about what you do with that and how you keep it under control, if you will.
First of all, let's make a distinction between triggers, which are something you're vulnerable to because of maybe childhood conditioning or whatever it might be, and life's downs, bad traffic, being on hold forever. Life presents these things. So how to manage things that are particular triggers for you, I'd recommend my wife's book, actually, Emotional Alchemy, which talks about how to bring a mindful awareness to habitual emotional patterns that are self-defeating. Let's put that aside for now. But if you want to do that, look at Emotional Alchemy.
Okay.
If you're talking about ordinary upsets, I think you are, that trigger an overreaction, which it seems to me you're using as an example. What I think you want to do is notice what's happening to you. You want to bring self-awareness to that moment. Like, if you get flipped out, if you get really angry at the being on hold or being in bad traffic, the question is, can you notice that before it happens? Can you see it building? If you, the minute you can see it, oh, I'm getting angry again, then you can intervene and short circuit the reaction. Once you have the reaction, the question is, how quickly can you recover? Oh, I really blew my top. I didn't have to do that. And not only that, can you set yourself up and prepare for the next time you're caught in traffic or on hold? Can you use it as a learning opportunity? It becomes that if you become self-aware and practice letting go or relaxing. There's a very powerful maxim in cognitive therapy. You don't have to believe your thoughts. It's your thoughts that are cheering on the anger. It's your thoughts that are making you angry. They're doing this to me, for example. That's one of those thoughts. Well, actually, they're doing it to everyone. There's no them even. It's just an existential situation.
Yeah.
If you can talk to yourself, you can talk yourself out of it or talk yourself down from it. And I would say there's kind of two routes to intervention in those upsets. One is cognitive, right? I see that, well, it's not just me in this traffic jam. It's like everybody, and it's rush hour. So what do I expect? It's going to be like this. Whatever helps you see that. The other is to change your physiology. So if you, for example, if you practice focusing every day, like in the morning, 10 minutes, whatever, your body, your set point shifts gradually so that you don't get so upset in the first place. You may be bothered, but you're not going to be, fiercely angry. So I'd recommend one of the two or both.
And I'm curious if you, took the mirror onto yourself.
Yeah.
You've been at this for decades, but through the lens of a social scientist. I can't tell you how many I don't know, cardiologists I've been to who are overweight and don't eat well and don't exercise well, smokers, et cetera. And I don't mean it tongue in cheek. I just mean, and I
Yeah,
don't mean that they're not superstar physicians. They probably are. It
yeah.
just means that not everyone always, practices what they preach. So have you yourself, do you feel like you've mastered when we go through from self-awareness to self-management and the empathy, would you sort of be off the charts scoring across all these dimensions, or are you still on an ongoing journey from that perspective?
I think you're asking the wrong person. You should be asking my wife.
Your wife about you. Can we get her on?
Yeah. Which gets to another thing. If you're trying to evaluate this area, this skill set, I don't think that asking people about themselves is the best way to do it. I think asking other people who know them well, 360s is the way it
Yeah.
looks in inventories.
Yeah.
You get a more veridical picture of what the person is actually like. So, because we're all biased, we all think we're better than average, that we're not so bad. We have selective memory. We have a selective sense of ourselves, and other people see us as we are.
Okay. I'll get your wife next, and we'll ask her these things. So look, so once we've got the self awareness and the self management, it doesn't necessarily mean that we'll care about other people, which is where empathy enters the equation here. You need empathy to build strong relationships, of course. But Dan, before we dive into empathy,
Yes.
curious why you chose to use it as an ingredient to enter the optimal state. And I say that it's just a question of curiosity because the flow state has very little to do with anyone other than yourself. And I get that this is a spectrum and we're trying to come back from the peak of that spectrum. But flow is all about, one being in the moment, one being in the zone, if you will, to oversimplify. So why is caring about others so important for this optimal state?
One of the characteristics of the optimal state is you feel very connected to other people. You're harmonious with them. Nobody these days works in a vacuum. Everybody is part of a team, de facto or explicit. And the big question then is, well, how do you relate to the people around you? And if you don't have empathy, you're not relating.
Okay. And you define earlier the cognitive empathy, the emotional empathy, and then the empathetic concern.
Yes.
The latter being not just knowing how others think or feel, but actually caring about other people. So I can see how one can flex the muscle in the first two. I'm just curious with the empathetic concern, is that something that you can actually increase, or either you care or you don't care? It's just a sense of your natural state.
This is a very important point. All of this is learned in life and learnable. It's never too late if you're motivated to increase any aspect of emotional intelligence. I have this Daniel Goleman emotional intelligence online program. It's a 12-week program in each part of emotional intelligence, and it's aimed to help people not just understand the concept, but to get better in their lives at this. So any part of this can be enhanced. And when you look at the three parts of empathy, cognitive empathy and emotional empathy, those are crucial in a sense for, say, marketing or for for leadership, but not marketing that cares about the person, nor leadership that cares about the people. That's the third part. And in research I've seen on what makes someone outstanding in sales, for example, it's that they care about the other person. They're more like a consultant. They'd rather give up a particular sale and keep the relationship long term. And that means they care. So they might say, well, this isn't the best thing for you this time around. But just saying that cements the relationship because the person you're saying to it realizes, oh, this person cares more about me than making the sale. That's really important. And I think in leadership, one of the crucial aspects of leadership is demonstrating that you care. It's called coaching or mentoring, helping someone develop further strengths. That's empathy in action, I would say. And it really builds immense loyalty and cements relationships between a leader and a follower.
Can I be just a bit provocative for a second?
Of course.
So we are right on the heels of George Santos being pushed out of Congress. He is I think the sixth congressperson in history to be kicked out of the U.S. House of Representatives. Certainly doesn't have any empathetic concern, to say the least. But I'm wondering, the fact that he convinced all of these people to get him into office, is there some element of empathy that he had in order to know, in a very harmful, manipulative way, granted, but to understand what he had to do to get people to feel like, he's with us?
Sociopaths and narcissists are very good at the first two kinds of empathy. That's what makes them really dangerous. As you put it, they seem to care. Actually, they don't care, but they are very good at knowing what you're thinking and knowing what you're feeling. And I think, sad to say, not George Santos, many politicians have strengths there. And as I said, many marketers have those strengths. The question is, do you add the third? Do you really care? And in a leader, this is very important. For example, in some emotionally intelligent organizations, performance review is not just based on did you, hit your targets for the quarter, but how did you hit them? Because if you hit them in a way where you pressured people, you stressed them out, and you made them stay, endless hours at work, whatever, to get the business result you wanted, are you weakening the organization by making those people want to leave? This is how you lose talent. How did you get them? Did you get it by inspiring people to give their best and be engaged? Or did you just pressure them and stress them out, get the numbers, which is what you cared about, but you don't care about the person? And the person knows that, and you become a leader that they don't want to keep working for.
Is that third element, that empathetic concern, is that the toughest one in your experience that you've seen leaders gain some competence in?
I wouldn't say it's the toughest one. I would say a lot of people have it naturally. They may not realize that they need to use it not just with their kids and their spouses and their friends, but with their employees too. It may be domain specific when it shouldn't be. And some people don't have it and need to think about it, reflect on why and how to get it.
So I want to pivot now to talk about teams. And this is the first time I think I've heard EI actually applied to teams. It's called Team EI. And maybe it's been out there. I haven't come across it. A lot of studies out there that show that there's this strong linkage between Team EI and team performance. Wanted to get a definition of it because I assume Team EI is more than just the sum total of all the individual EI scores, if you will. I know scores isn't the right term here, but it's got to be something more than that. How do I think about that?
Yeah. So when you see EI as an emergent property of a group or of a team, you're talking about something different than individual emotional intelligence. What you're talking about is how people in that group or on that team routinely relate to each other. These are called norms in sociology. And you might have a norm on a team that we can be candid. You might have a norm on a team that we show each other that they belong. And by the way, this is really interesting. Team leaders or team members may not realize that their nonverbals matter enormously in terms of giving people a sense of belonging or not. And it comes down to when that person, the target person, is speaking, do we look at our phones? Do we start a side conversation? In other words, do we not pay attention? That communicates to everyone in the group that that person doesn't matter to you. If you're the leader, designated leader of the team, it's devastating to that person. And it tells everyone on the team they don't belong. So belonging, paying full attention when someone speaks. At IDEO, which, the creativity consultancy, at one branch, if you interrupt someone who's speaking, which is another form of devaluing them, you get pelted with toy animals. That's a fun way to reinforce a norm. The norm is we listen to everybody out, we respect what everyone says. So it's the norms, the habitual ways people on the team relate that define whether or not they have emotional intelligence. And there are norms that support team self-awareness. For example, we know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and we can say, so-and-so should do this because that other person isn't so good at it. And we can say it openly because we trust each other. We have candor. That's another norm. You can have team self-management. Teams can manage norms, for example. I just gave you an example of that. You can have team empathy for each person within the team and also for other groups or divisions or teams in your organization and in the other organization that matter to you. You can have designated ambassadors. You can have someone whose job it is to appreciate that team, to build strong relationships with your supplier, for example, or whomever it may be. And that's an example of a team relationship skill. So the researcher who's come up with this, Vanessa Druskat, has a very elaborate questionnaire for a team where they can evaluate themselves and decide they decide what they're going to do to get better at self-management or self-awareness, empathy, whatever it may be. It's very important that they decide, not that it be imposed, because they'll actually do it. And she also has found in her research that the teams with the highest group EI, team EI, are the most productive by whatever criterion fits that team, whatever the metric might be. So I was a little surprised at first by her research, but I think it's extremely important. It makes a lot of sense.
And I know you also touched on psychological safety, which is probably one of these ingredients. I recently had Amy Edmondson on the podcast, which it feels like you need to have that safe place so people can bring their full selves, to work.
Psychological safety is what the people at Google came up with as a term when they looked at their most outstanding teams. And in what I was just saying, psychological safety is equivalent to a sense of belonging. I feel like I'm okay here. I can take a risk. I can expose myself. I can give my best ideas, even if they may seem flaky at first. By the way, another norm that I really appreciate was at Sandia National Lab, where there are 3,000 or 4,000 PhDs working there. The director of that lab told me, we have a norm here where when someone comes up with a new idea, the next person who speaks has to be an angel's advocate. It's easy to knock down a new idea, be a devil's advocate, but new ideas are fragile. They need support. So we have a norm here that we support it. The next person who talks supports it.
One other point I wanted to mention in the book, you talk about how leaders more open with their feelings are seen as more authentic. Those that are more authentic have an easier time building trust. And with trust comes better teams, better outcomes, et cetera, which completely makes sense. And we've heard the term, bring your authentic self, over and over. Here's something I'm sort of wrestling with. Maybe you can help me square in my mind here, Dan, because it feels like there's a bit of a balancing act between being open and vulnerable as a leader, specifically, versus being confident and steadfast for the benefit of the organization, which is looking for reassurance and hope. So if I'm working at Microsoft, I don't know that I want Satya Nadella to share that he's got imposter syndrome, for example. Not that he does, but if he did, you sort of want to hear some bit of, I've got this, right? Yeah. Whatever it is, a pilot flying the plane, the CEO of the company whatever it is. So what are your thoughts on that? How does one balance those when you're in a leadership role?
That's a really important question. And I would say there's no one answer that fits all situations. It is a balancing act. But I would say that at the extremes, the leader who never shows any vulnerability, doesn't bring their authentic self, people may not feel they're really completely trustworthy. People who air their every worry and anxiety or frustration might have the same effect of saying too much. So I think there's a middle ground where you articulate a worry. You may be articulating something that almost everyone else is feeling, and they're relieved to hear that you feel it too. But you probably want to add, and we're going to go forward in this way or that. That is, you want to add a kind of leadership reassurance, no matter what the vulnerability may be.
Well, what I really like about this optimal state is if you are working for someone else and you may not see eye to eye, if you're working for an organization and you may not be completely aligned with the broader purpose, not that you shouldn't ultimately try to find someone to work for or an organization that's more aligned with your internal compass. But what I like is it's not dependent on that. And this is coming back to the point of you talk about if you can enter this optimal state, it's the bus driver. Mm-hmm. It wasn't about he was, read the mission of that organization and fell in love with it. He just had his own internal sense of purpose. If you can get in the optimal state, as you put it, you're more creative, you're more productive, you're more upbeat, more positive, you're more mentally sharp, more engaged, but it's not dependent on others. You can do it for yourself, even if there are factors, external factors that may be pushing against it, which I think is very encouraging.
Well, and the business climate today is pretty tough, and there's lots of things you can stress about. But if you can manage your own inner state, no matter what's going on, if you can remind yourself of some larger purpose, if you can handle distractions better, if you can stay focused, particularly, you're more likely to be able to get into that optimal state, no matter what else is happening around you. That's very important because lots of stuff is happening around us all the time these days. So staying on your own even keel, staying calm and staying clear, I think has become more important, not less important, as time has gone on.
Any final thoughts on this topic before we close out?
It's never too late to get better.
Never. I'm hitting 55 in a couple months. Not too late.
Not too late. Once you stop breathing, it may be too late.
Okay. Let's hope that doesn't happen. Dan, here's how I always close the podcast. It's called The Art of Excellence. And I chose that word excellence because I feel like it's so easily defined based on the vantage point of the person who's answering it. So curious, when you think of that word, what do you think of excellence? What does it mean to you?
I think it means being in a state where you can do your best at whatever it is you're doing, whatever that might be. And that's what we're calling optimal. That's
perfect. This is one of those books where it's not going to be a one-timer for me. I will just as I have with emotional intelligence. It's probably one of these every so many years. You go back and revisit, and you take out a different piece of it. But really well done. A lot I'm sure we didn't cover, but absolutely recommend it for everyone. And I hope you're not done. I hope this isn't the last of you, and this is your farewell tour, because you just got too much to give. And knock on wood, you haven't stopped breathing yourself. So I hope you keep going, because you've done so much to further ourselves at a personal level, at an organizational level. I so admire what you've done, and so appreciative that you spend time with me. Thank you, Dan.
Glenn, you're very kind. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, here's my ask of you. First, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the show. You can find it on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Second, tell a friend. Better yet, share it with all your friends and contacts on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Honestly, wherever you hang out online is fine with me. Please leave me a review if you could on iTunes or Spotify or both. The reviews really do help. And finally, try to find one takeaway from this episode that you can apply to your own life. Commit to trying something, anything. As the saying goes, no harm in trying. I leave you with this one question. How do you define the word excellence?